Germany's most advanced tanks lost the war. The Tiger I, with its 88 mm gun and 100 mm of frontal armor, was arguably the most feared vehicle on any battlefield in 1943. The Panther, designed specifically to answer the T-34, was faster, better armored, and more lethal than almost anything the Allies could field. Both were engineering achievements. Both were disasters in practice, and both were eventually abandoned, out of fuel, out of parts, or simply broken down on the side of a road they were never designed to travel. The tank that outlasted them both had been introduced in 1936. It weighed 25 tons. Its original gun couldn't penetrate most of what it faced by 1942. The Wehrmacht High Command considered it a stopgap, a placeholder until the real weapons arrived. The real weapons arrived, and the Panzer IV kept going. That requires an explanation. In 1934, Germany's new Panzerwaffe, its armored corps, needed two tanks. One was a light infantry support vehicle. The other, designated the Versuch-Kraftfahrzeug 622, was a heavier medium tank built around a larger caliber weapon. Krupp won the contract. By 1937, the production version reached Army units under its operational name, Panzer IV. The design brief was simple and, crucially, modest. The tank was not intended to hunt other tanks. It was intended to destroy fortified positions, anti-tank gun emplacements, and enemy infantry, the things that stopped lighter armor from moving forward. Its original armament was a short-barreled 75 mm howitzer, the KWK 37/24, optimized for firing high explosive shells at bunkers, not armor-piercing rounds at other tanks. This is important. The Panzer IV was not designed to be the best tank in a fight. It was designed to do a specific job in support of other armor. That distinction between a purpose-built infantry support vehicle and a prestige weapon system would define everything that came after. Heinz Guderian, who wrote the doctrine that governed German armored operations, understood the Panzer IV's role precisely. It was the heavy fist behind the light sword. The Panzer IIIs would engage enemy armor. The Panzer IVs would crack open whatever the Panzer IIIs couldn't. By 1939, when German armor rolled into Poland, fewer than 300 Panzer IVs existed. They worked. The problem came in 1941, when Germany's white sword shattered against something it had never encountered. The Soviet T-34 was faster, better sloped, and more reliably armed than anything Germany had fielded. The Panzer III was obsolete almost overnight. The Panzer IV, the supposed support vehicle, was suddenly the only German tank that could be upgraded to deal with the new reality. To understand why the Panzer IV survived when more sophisticated designs did not, you have to understand how tanks actually fail in wartime, not in combat, but in production. Consider what a tank needs to go from a drawing to a fighting unit in the field. It needs a hull that can be manufactured on existing tooling. It needs an engine that mechanics already understand. It needs spare parts that the supply chain already stocks. And it needs a design with enough internal volume that future modifications, a bigger gun, more armor, different radios, don't require rebuilding the vehicle from scratch. The Panzer III failed on nearly all of these counts. Its hull required precision tolerances that slowed production to a trickle. Germany built 1,347 Tigers across 3 years of production. The Panther, despite its tactical brilliance, was rushed into service in 1943, with unresolved transmission failures so severe that at the Battle of Kursk, more Panthers broke down on the way to the line than were destroyed by Soviet guns. The Panzer IV was different for one reason that its designers almost certainly did not intend. Its hull was large, not enormous, but large enough. The internal volume of the Panzer IV's fighting compartment was sufficient to accept a fundamentally different weapon without redesigning the structure around it. When the Wehrmacht needed a tank that could actually penetrate Soviet armor at combat ranges, the answer was not a new tank, it was a new gun in an existing hull. The KWK-37L-24, the short howitzer of the early models, was removed. In its place went the KWK-40-43, a long-barreled, high-velocity 75mm gun capable of penetrating 99mm of vertical armor at 500 meters. Later models received the L-48 variant, pushing that figure higher still. The same chassis, the same tracks, the same engine compartment, the same logistical footprint, different capability. The Ausführung H-F, introduced in June 1942, was effectively a different tank wearing the same coat. The G, H, and J variants that followed refined the design further. Additional armor plating, modified turret, simplified production features. By the Ausführung H, the Panzer IV had 80 millimeters of frontal armor compared to the original 14.5 millimeters. The gun could engage a T-34 at ranges the T-34 could not safely return fire. None of this required Germany to retool its factories or retrain its crews. The mechanics who maintained a Panzer IV in 1941 maintained the Ausführung H in 1944. The supply chain that fed parts to one fed parts to the other. Here is the flaw. And it is not a flaw in the Panzer IV, it is a flaw in the institutions that decided what should replace it. Germany built the most sophisticated tanks in the world, and then built too few of them too late, of designs that couldn't be sustained. That production problem is the real story here. Subscribe if you want more of these. We're not done with the Panzer IV yet, because the worst decisions came after the tank proved itself. By 1943, Germany's armored corps officers in the field had reached a near consensus position. The Panzer IV worked. It was reliable, upgradable, understood by its crews, and present in sufficient numbers to actually matter on the battlefield. The logical conclusion, the conclusion any supply officer, any logistics commander, any engineer with access to the production figures would have drawn, was to build more of them. That is not what happened. Adolf Hitler had become personally involved in tank development in a way that had no precedent in any other major power's military procurement system. He attended design presentations, he approved modifications, he rejected proposals, and he was captivated by scale, by the idea that German engineering could produce something so overwhelming, so visually dominant, that it would break the enemy's will to fight before a shot was fired. The Tiger I had partially satisfied this impulse. The Tiger II, the Königstiger, the King Tiger, would satisfy it more completely. And the proposed Maus, a tank so large at 188 metric tons that no bridge in Europe could support its weight, would satisfy it most completely of all. These decisions had a direct cost measured in Panzer IVs. Germany produced 8,553 Panzer IVs across the war, a substantial number, though it should be compared to Soviet T-34 production of approximately 57,000 units across the same period. But the more damaging figure is not total production, it is the production trajectory. In 1943, as Germany's situation on the Eastern Front deteriorated following Stalingrad, Wehrmacht commanders requested an increase in Panzer IV output. The requests were partially granted, but the resources allocated to Tiger and Panther production were not reduced proportionally. Germany was attempting to build 3 medium to heavy tank programs simultaneously on an industrial base that was already absorbing Allied strategic bombing. Albert Speer, who became Reich Minister of Armaments in 1942, understood the problem. He argued for rationalization, for choosing fewer designs and building them in volume. His memoir, published in 1969, describes repeated confrontations with Hitler over exactly this question. The decision, repeatedly, was not rationalization. It was addition. New programs were approved before old ones were resolved. The Panther's production priority was elevated after Kursk, despite its persistent mechanical failures. Between June and December 1943, Panther availability rates hovered between 37 and 54%, meaning that on any given day, fewer than half of Panther units were operational. Crews referred to the transmission as a scheduled failure. Engineers documented the problem. Command continued production and continued deployment. Meanwhile, Panzer IV availability rates across the same period ran consistently above 70%. The tank that worked was the one Germany chose not to prioritize. There is a tactical dimension to this as well. The Panther and Tiger were tactically superior in a direct engagement at range, but the war Germany was fighting by 1943 was not a war of deliberate engagements at range. It was a war of attrition, of Soviet offensives that required defensive depth, of breakout attempts that required mechanical reliability across hundreds of miles of road. The Tiger weighed 57 tons, the Panther weighed 44 tons, the Panzer IV weighed 25 tons. When a bridge failed, when a road became mud, when a fuel convoy was delayed, one of those three numbers determined which tank kept moving. The Panzer IV kept moving. The institutions responsible for equipping Germany's army chose not to notice. The last Panzer IVs in Wehrmacht service fought in the spring of 1945 on roads leading into Germany itself. Some served in the Hungarian theater as late as March of that year. They were not the most powerful tanks in the German inventory at that point. They were simply the ones still running. Several hundred survive today in various states of preservation. The Tank Museum at Bovington, England, holds an Ausfuhren H. The Musée des Blindés at Saumur, France, holds an Ausfuhren J, the final production variant. A handful exist in private collections and national military museums across Israel, Syria, and Finland, where the Panzer IV served with various armies through the 1960s. The Finnish army retired theirs in 1962. The Syrian army operated them into the 1967 Six-Day War, where they were destroyed, not by obsolescence, but by a different enemy's air power. That is the machine. Here is what the machine's story actually is. It isn't a story about German engineering genius. The engineers who designed the Panzer IV were competent professionals solving a specific problem with the tools available in 1934. They were not visionaries. They built a sensible and adaptable vehicle, and sensible and adaptable turned out to matter more than exceptional. What it is a story about what happens when an institution confuses impressiveness with effectiveness. Germany built Tigers because Tigers were impressive. They built Panthers because Panthers were impressive. They built a 188-ton steel monument called the Mouse that never reached the front because the idea of it was impressive. And they underinvested in the one vehicle that actually functioned as a fighting system at scale across 5 years of war, because it was not impressive. It was just reliable. The Panzer IV didn't outlast Germany's best tanks because it was better. It outlasted them because it was possible. Possible to build, possible to maintain, possible to keep moving when everything else stopped. That is a lesson that had nothing to do with tanks. Subscribe if you want more of this. The machinery is the excuse. The decisions are the story.